We are just hours away from Prime Minister Mark Carney's first official meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, taking place tomorrow morning. And the CBC's Katie Simpson is in Washington. She's covering it all for us. So, Katie, what should we expect to come out of this initial meeting tomorrow?
You know, if you talk to the experts who are watching this closely, people who've previously served in government, whether they are staffers, whether they are former cabinet ministers, everyone seems to think that this is all about the relationship reset, an opportunity for Mark Carney to try and get back to a constructive and respectful working dialogue between Ottawa and Washington in the hopes of eventually getting to a place where, first and foremost, tariffs are lifted on Canada, but then again, other issues are dealt with as well. Of course, many Canadians incredibly upset with the annexation comments that Donald Trump continues to repeat just as recently as this past weekend in an interview with NBC News Meet the Press. Donald Trump saying it's always going to be something that he brings up. But first and foremost, what we're hearing is the key right now is to try to get a relationship reset. This is an opportunity for Donald Trump and Mark Carney to get to know each other, even just briefly as people. And then, of course, what we have seen from Canadian officials leading up to this. I know that there's a new prime minister in place now, but the Canadian government has continually tried to convince the Trump administration, work with its allies, and talk about different ways that Canada and the U.S. can work together and be more constructive and deepen that relationship. But again, of course, the top thing on Canada's agenda, on Mark Carney's agenda, is going to be trying to get to a dialogue when it comes to getting those tariffs removed. Expectations have sort of been lowered about any sort of breakthrough or any deal announcement, anything like that. Really, the big expectation out of this is try to reset and restore the relationship and try to direct the Canada-U.S. relationship on a much different path. Things really soured between former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump. With Donald Trump hurling insults at Justin Trudeau and at Canada as well. And really, this moment is seen widely as an opportunity to reset.
So reset, restore, redirect, those are the best case scenarios, Katie. What about the possibility of something of a worst case scenario, which is an Oval Office confrontation, maybe with some negative economic consequences for Canada?
Yeah, and every world leader who's going to the Oval Office has to look at what happened to Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. When that conversation, that event in front of the press in the Oval Office, it deteriorated and ended sort of in a back and forth where the president was berating an American ally. That is sort of every world leader has to take note of that and has to prepare for in case of a worst case scenario, there is some sort of confrontation. Earlier today, I spoke with Brian Clow. He served as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Deputy Chief of Staff. He also led the Canada-U.S. relations file. And he said he's expecting Trump to be respectful here. But in case there are moments that don't go as expected, every world leader, he says, has to have a plan.
It's a balance of you need to stand up for your country and yourself. You need to correct facts when misstatements are made. But at the same time, my advice would be give the president some room to do what he clearly likes to do, which is perform in front of the media and pick your battles. You obviously don't want a situation like what happened with the Ukrainian president.
So the big question here will be, will the 51st state annexation talk come up during the public portion of tomorrow's events? You can expect that the Oval Office is going to be filled with reporters, and the expectation is people are going to definitely ask about it. People in the Oval Office today, the day before this meeting, have been asking President Trump about it. He didn't repeat the annexation threats today, but he did acknowledge that Canada is very mad at him. Roger Goodell, who's the commissioner of the NFL, was in the Oval Office to make an announcement about Washington, D.C. hosting the 2027 NFL draft. And he spoke, Roger Goodell talked about USMCA and congratulating Donald Trump on it. And Trump said something to the effect of, Canada's not very happy with me right now, something to that effect. So there is sort of an acknowledgement that there are those tensions there. The big question is, will they be on full display tomorrow? Will there be a different kind of tone? I'll look at everything from body language to how people describe the meeting afterwards, what sort of leaks come out of these meetings, those kinds of things. So it will certainly be one of the biggest tests that Mark Carney is going to face this very early on in his term as Prime Minister.
Yeah, high stakes and fascinating to watch. Thanks for putting it all into context for us, Katie.
Thanks.
The CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. Well, ahead of Carney and Trump's meeting tomorrow, the stakes continue to rise for Canadian workers. On Friday, Unifor said this GM plant in Oshawa will be cutting an entire shift because of Trump's tariffs. The union says about 750 workers will be directly laid off and that over 1,500 more workers will be impacted elsewhere in the supply chain. Flavio Volpe is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He's also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Hey there, Flavio. You heard about all the re's from Katie, restore, redirect, and Aretha's favorite, RESPECT, respect. You think Canada is going to get any in this visit tomorrow?
Well, we can't control how the president and his team behave, and that's really important. We can only control how we respond. They're TV people. Even the Zelensky meeting was a TV moment for them. And, they've had other moments there. I think what's more important is what happens in the meeting beforehand. I expect that the Prime Minister and his team will be prepared to bring a few items to the table that are mutually beneficial, perhaps drawing on what the Americans do actually need from us. They need energy products from us. They need critical minerals. They need a full defense partner. And so I imagine that conversation is going to be substantive. I would like to see that we come out with some type of formal arrangement for where we negotiate. In the Trump 1.0 that Brian Clow talked to Katie about, and Brian was a central figure there. We had negotiating tables and we had a schedule, and we were able to counter their proposals and present our positions. We don't have that right now. If there's some drama in the Oval Office, I think what I've been counseling everybody is they're always so revealing of the president and his team. We should watch. We should learn from it. But that's not the meeting. The meeting is the one beforehand.
There's a lot to, unpack there, Flavio. When you talk about the expectations of sort of setting out a path going forward. That is the gold standard for you coming out of this. If Mark Carney comes out and says, well, we've come to an agreement that's starting in 60 days, 30 days, however many days our negotiators are going to get around the same table, that's what a win looks like?
Well, I'll give you an example. Last week, Customs and Border Patrol put out an update that said, in fact, Canadian auto parts will be treated as USMCA compliant, which will not have a tariff on them. Dozens of us did hundreds of meetings and thousands of interviews to get the math out there to say, look, in the U.S. interest, if you target Canadian auto parts, then you're going to shut down the industry. Stakeholders in the U.S. stood up and spoke up to the White House. We did that all without a negotiating table. You can get small victories and temporary victories, but we're talking about those tariffs are a full treatment of our entire economy. They are different layers of tariffs, but they're all being put out on a whim in the Rose Garden or on Truth Social. And I think it would be an important move for Canada to be able to acquire some type of formal place to, at the very least, counter-propose. Right now, the president prefers this way. He has all the leverage. He does this bilaterally, and then he tries to divide. I think it would be a good signal also by the White House that they're serious about doing deals with their closest allies, even if they're trying to advantage their position in it. If what they get from Canada in terms of relationship and a response from Prime Minister Carney is going to inform how they deal with Europe, Japan, and South Korea. So there is something really to be gained by President Trump and his team in having a good meeting with Prime Minister Carney and our team.
I wonder to what extent, because of course you've got such an interesting line of sight into this, to what extent do you think we know at this point how much of the tension between Trump and Canada was actually personal. How much of it was about Justin Trudeau and belittling him, calling him governor, that Trump liked to sort of, whether he liked him or not, because you certainly hear from some Liberals and people in Justin Trudeau's PMO that they got along just fine, but that Trump sort of wanted to overshadow our previous Prime Minister.
Well, I think when they met in the first term, and he had never served in government before, and he saw this kind of world famous, charming Canadian Prime Minister who was in the middle of his first majority and had a whole bunch of political equity. You know, he's trying to figure out how this guy with his background is a G7 leader, and what does it take to get there, and how does he have all this international equity and popularity. And then as he met him the second time, he said, well, now I know government, and now I feel bulletproof, and I feel like I'm better and more powerful than you. And we saw Trump, the real estate developer who's famous for renegotiating his negotiations and stiffing his suppliers and saying, I may actually like Justin Trudeau, but I'm a TV guy. And if I can bully him, I can show everybody else that. So he started down this 51st state path. We might even hear this tomorrow. It won't be a reflection of the relationship between Trump and Carney. It'll be a reflection, I think, in part, on whether he thinks he still has some leverage over us from a political anxiety point of view.
So
I do think a lot of it was personal, but I do think Carney is an internationally acclaimed financial expert. I don't think they're used to seeing those in these types of meetings.
So what is the best thing in your mind that the Prime Minister can do if Donald Trump starts behaving in a belittling fashion, not so much towards him, but towards Canada, and says, well, you should just be a state, and really sort of gets on his soapbox? Is the right thing to do when you talk about being calm, cool, and collected? Is it just to sit back and not antagonize him, or is it important for Canadians to hear our Prime Minister be a bit perhaps not antagonistic, but firm in the face of something like that?
I think the latter is what we're all expecting. I don't want to see him in having an argument with him if he starts an argument. You know, I've never been in a negotiation with the person with the leverage is the one who's yelling. And I think normal people understand that. But Emmanuel Macron handled the president's untruths a few times, interjecting respectfully, saying, oh, by the way, no, we did pay our way. We are investing heavily in the Russia-Ukraine war, and I think there's a way to do that. But I also think to meet Mark Carney is to understand that he's got a self-effacing sense of humor that comes from the confidence of having been around the table with world leaders for the longest time. I think right now he's the right person for this meeting. I think that sense of cool also helps to dictate what that room looks like.
Yeah, so be Macron, don't be Zelensky, certainly. You give this advice, be calm, be cool. And I wonder for you, Flavio, when you see firsthand how many workers' jobs are on the line, do you feel calm and cool in the lead up to this, or is there a sense of precarity? Are you nervous about what might happen tomorrow?
Well, Catherine, I think you've seen me do interviews and seen me speak publicly. I always have the same tone and posture. The math doesn't work for the Americans to target the Canadian auto sector and survive. He will bankrupt one of the American automakers before he gets a victory, and we know that. And so part of that is being calm. He's picked a fight with the rest of the world and with so many domestic adversaries in all aspects of American life. His position isn't going to get stronger from here. He's going to need allies. He's going to need to climb down with the types of allies that can deliver American victories. Canada is uniquely positioned to do that. Americans are so heavily invested here and heavily invested in our spending there that if he made a deal with Canada first, then he could demonstrate that a whole bunch of those metrics that are going to go off the charts, the bond market, the confidence in the U.S. dollar, spending in tourism, all those things, we can help with that. And so I'd still remain calm. If I was in that meeting and he was yelling at me, I would have this face, because in the end, one of his predecessors says best to walk softly and carry a big stick. There's no point in arguing with him on TV. If we have the leverage that we think we have, let it play out.
Let me just ask you in closing, we talked off the top about people losing their jobs in Oshawa over this. And I think, and you mentioned the sort of back and forth we've had, the changes to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, exempting auto parts that are CUSMA compliant. Just pull out for folks who have not followed those ups and downs. What would you say is the current state of Canada's auto sector in the face of these threats? We knew that this could be catastrophic. We haven't seen a worst case scenario yet. How bad is it?
Well, the worst case scenario would have been an auto parts tariff. It would have shut down production like the Ambassador Bridge blockade did and the pandemic did. The scenario is workers are anxious across this country. They go on shifts. They don't take their phones with them. They're not looking at CBC through the day. They come off shift wondering if something's changed. Suppliers, Canadian companies who supply parts on both sides of the border are worried that the auto companies who are still subject to a tariff will reduce production like we saw in Oshawa. It's not a good moment for peace and tranquility. People that rely on these jobs and have relied as families on these jobs for generations know that if an auto company pulls out of a town, it doesn't come back. Those types of jobs that feed kids and pay the mortgage are really important. But they also, I think, watch out for leaders like us who say, okay, are you, what's your mood? Are you despondent? Are you taking the fight, the math to the Americans and to the American media and to partners? Are you ready to take on, as we are, the U.S. government in court on Section 232 national security tariffs on parts? I hope they hear from people like me and some of the others like Lana Payne or Brian Kingston that if this ship goes down, I'll go down with it. So don't worry if you hear your representatives or your leaders yelling or not. I'm in it 24 hours a day. I have been since November 5th.
Well, message received. Thank you very much for taking the time on a pretty important evening. Appreciate it, Flavio Volpe.
Thank you, Catherine.
Flavio Volpe is, of course, the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. Prime Minister Mark Carney has touched down in the United States. Tomorrow, he will meet with U.S. President Donald Trump to begin resetting the Canada-U.S. relationship.
What's your expectation for your meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister tomorrow?
I don't know. He's coming to see me. I'm not sure what he wants to see me about, but I guess he wants to make a deal. Everybody does.
Carney said his top priority will be to get U.S. tariffs off Canadian goods, something political leaders on both sides of the border are calling for.
I think about our timber industry here. I think about our film industry, the jobs that are dependent on both sides of the border, and the same true in the auto sector in Ontario.
Trump's tariff tax is jacking up prices, smashing supply chains, forcing small shops to raise costs, lay off people, or worse yet, close their doors altogether.
But looming over the meeting are the president's own words about making Canada the 51st state.
Do you plan to talk to him about making Canada a 51st state?
He wants to come and see me. He's going to come this week or next week.
So will you talk to him about making Canada a 51st state, annexing Canada?
I'll always talk about that. You know why? We subsidize Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year.
So, how should Prime Minister Mark Carney approach tomorrow's high-stakes meeting? The Power Panel is here for that conversation. Rachel Siegel is the former Director of Policy in the Harper government and the co-host of Beyond a Ballot podcast. Brad Levine is the former National Campaign Director for the NDP. And here with me in studio, Vandana Qatar was an advisor to former Prime Minister Trudeau, and Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Hello, everybody. An exciting day to be having this conversation. And just to amp up the volume a little bit, Howard Lutnick has said in an interview in the U.S. of Canada, they have their socialist regime and it's basically feeding off America. So things maybe not off to a great start. We're going to try to get that tape and hear a bit of the context around it over the course of this conversation. But Rob, I will start with you. Already we see the temperature being turned up. What are your expectations going into tomorrow?
Very low. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a bar for success. I think there is a bar for success. I must say, I've been covering meetings between the presidents and the prime ministers for almost 40 years. I don't think I've covered one or watched one that has more portent than this does. Usually the initial meeting is to try and establish what kind of a relationship the two men have, but I think this one has to go beyond that. It is important, though, to discover what you can do, because if you do have a decent relationship at the personal level, at the executive level, a lot can be done. I think of the work that Brian Mulroney did with Ronald Reagan over Mr. Reagan's advisors' objections often because of that personal relationship. The relationship between Mr. Clinton and Jean Chrétien was exceptional. Chrétien Bush, the younger, terrible, right? So you can have both. As to what can be expected out of tomorrow, I think there are really just a couple of issues for Canada. Number one is to remove the tariffs that are on now. That has to be a demand. It really has to be. I know a lot of people think that we might begin the process towards a renegotiation. You can't renegotiate with a gun to your head. The tariffs are like a gun to our head. The other thing that Mr. Carney did mention during the election campaign was an economic and security arrangement. And so we can talk about things because the president said it again in the interview with NBC that they can't defend themselves. And he's not mistaken about that. He's right. We do depend on the United States. So what kind of a security arrangement could we offer? F-35s, are we going to go ahead with that? Do we join AUKUS? That's another question that we could look at. But really what we can offer them is critical minerals. That's what he's very interested in now. We have a huge supply of cobalt, nickel, other minerals that are important when it comes to the defense industry. Those are kind of magic bells for Donald Trump.
Vandana, Rob talks about Mulroney and Reagan, and I just think, like, obviously, I don't know how much Canadians would take kindly to an Irish eyes are smiling kind of moment, right? Like, there's an interesting question here, though, about the rapport that Carney wants to develop and how that is going to be seen amongst Canadians. You can make the case that Mark Carney was elected to do the thing he is going to do tomorrow, that it all comes down to that. So what is the line that he needs to walk? Like, we know he doesn't want to get a smackdown, but can he go too far in the other direction, do you think?
I think he's going to show, like, pragmatism, which is what he's been talking about as how he is as a leader. I think he's going to treat it as, I'm going to get to know this guy. And I think, to Rob's point, I don't think anything big will happen tomorrow. That would be my goal ultimately. But really just to size each other up and see what kind of personal connections they can make to each other. I think you start off, I think the way to work with Donald Trump, Donald Trump wants to be liked. And I think, Mark Carney has gotten a lot done within a first week of his mandate here. And I think because he has this reputation amongst global leaders, business leaders, I think that'll entice Trump to want to work with him. Obviously, he will speak to media and share certain views because that's going to be better for him. But I think behind closed doors, Carney will work towards a progressive relationship. That won't be solved tomorrow, but a good first step in a fresh page for the relationship.
Rachel, I do wonder how you think the Conservatives should handle this moment. I know Andrew Scheer was out there talking about the idea that Carney needs to come out of this with something concrete, which could be the removal of tariffs or at least the start of a negotiating process. But how should the Conservatives conduct themselves when all eyes are going to be on Mark Carney?
I think the Conservatives have been very clear in the last couple of days, including Andrew Scheer, and talking about how they will support the Liberals if they need that support in order to move this relationship forward. And I don't think they've wavered on that in the last couple of days. I think if I was on Carney's team today, I'd be very nervous. Mark Carney just had one of the greatest political comebacks in Canadian history when it comes to the Liberals winning government again. He's expending a lot of political capital going down there with meeting with somebody who is so volatile, who we don't know what will come of this tomorrow. And so what we've been seeing is that they have been tempering those expectations. We've heard that line from the Liberal camp a couple of times today. What will actually come of this meeting? I think ultimately what Carney's camp is probably hoping is that he comes out unscathed because, like you said, Catherine, he really put that question to Canadians. He put out a ballot box question that differed from Pierre Poilievre's question on affordability and more domestic issues. News, Mark Carney really played this question to Canadians throughout the federal campaign of who is better to go toe-to-toe with Trump. And it works out that this is one of the first tests of that in the first few days after he just got reelected as Prime Minister. And so I think there's a lot riding on the line for Carney domestically, but also a lot riding on the line for Canadians, our economy, and what's going to happen tomorrow in that room.
Brad, I'll ask you, how should Mark Carney conduct himself if Trump really leans into this 51st state, let's just call it nonsense, but, you know, this 51st state talk tomorrow? Should he just not antagonize Trump, or do you think he has a responsibility to push back?
No, I think that part of what Trump does, and I think we've seen this enough that this is a pattern, is these other things that come into the overall negotiations. Lots of distractions, lots of additives, lots of other things coming in. You saw him recently now he's talking about Hollywood movies and putting tariffs on foreign-made films. Well, that's a concern. Obviously, the TV and movie industry in this country is very important to jobs and economic development in places right across the country. You can see how he constantly puts things. And he said on the weekend on NBC, Meet the Press, he says, I'm always going to talk about it. So, you know, those are things that are known. I like the way that Carney has lowered the expectations for Canadians, unlike our friend on the panel here who's just raised them up again. There won't be. There can't be. I mean, even if we wanted to get some movement on things on Canada-U.S. free trade agreement, that's going to take a long, long time. They've already committed to a new agreement like that. I think what tomorrow is going to be is about tone setting. I think Vonda is right about this notion that despite all his bravado, you know, there's a deep insecurity in Donald Trump. He does want to be accepted by, I think, a certain cohort of global economic elites, of which Mark Carney is one. You know, we know that he loves royalty, which I thought is an interesting throw. It's very subtle, but, you know, King Charles coming to read the throne speech at the end of May, I think it sends a signal to that. We've got friends around the world. Last point, Catherine, is who Carney's going with. Today he met with business leaders in Washington that deal with, you know, Canadian business leaders who are there, as well as American who have business in Canada. Tomorrow, he's also joined by LeBlanc, so that's Canada-U.S. relations, Joly, foreign affairs, and McGuinty, there's public safety. So obviously he's taking a crew, and he's got staff coming with him as well, so that they can develop the relationships. This is really a tone-setting thing. This is a launch, as opposed to something where at the end of it, if there's not finality in the communique at the end of it that doesn't say we've got everything accomplished, it's therefore a failure. I don't think that should be our expectations. I think it should be the expectations as to what comes next. And of course, the G7 coming up in Alberta later in the summer will also be very important. Does that issue come up? And what role does Mark Carney play, not only in the Canada-U.S. relationship, but also his leadership role within the G7?
Okay, a few things to unpack there, Brad. One, worth noting later on in the program, we're going to be talking to a couple folks from Canada's film and television industry about what they are making, about what Trump is saying about that. But you also talked about Minister LeBlanc relationship building. We know, of course, he in particular has had this relationship with Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary. We talked about that tape, those comments about Canada that he has just made. We've got some of that for you right now.
I think it's really complex. I think this is really complex because they have been basically feeding off of us for decades upon decades upon decades, right? They have their socialist regime, and it's basically feeding off of America. I mean, the president calls that out all the time. Why do we make cars in Canada? Why do we do our films in Canada? Come on. So I think the president's going to have, I think it's going to be a fascinating meeting. I'm glad I'm going to be there listening, but it's going to be a fascinating meeting tomorrow. I just don't see how it works out so perfectly.
But you're not going to bust up USMCA. That deadline is next year for the final review.
Correct. So next year is coming. So a lot of things are going to be put into that.
So if it's USMCA compliant, you're okay.
I think for now it's okay, but I think what you should expect to see is a real revisiting of USMCA.
Okay, Rob Russo, I want to know what you make of that.
I'm reminded of what my Yiddish friends used to say about people like Mr. Lutnick. Lutnick is a nudnik, is what they would say. If he thinks that that we're a socialistic country. Yes, I lived in the United States for almost 8 years. I heard lots of this socialistic talk. But what I think it reminds us of is that this is not going to be a dash through the daisies. This is going to be very, very difficult. And despite the president's lack of curiosity, it seems, about what Mr. Carney wants to talk to him about, I can assure you, given that Mr. Carney said, I think 2 weeks ago, while the campaign was still going on, that the next prime minister needs to go down to Washington in a hurry, that officials have been working on this visit for a long, long time. It's planned up to the minute, including the arrival, including the handshake. Well, we'll go over it frame by frame, I assure you.
David's going to get his big TV out and we'll just
telestrate it. Yeah,
board.
Yeah, but everything has been carefully calibrated, and there shouldn't be any surprises at all, including for Mr. Lutnick. He knows what's on the agenda. He knows what constitutes a successful meeting by them. I was interested to hear him say that what he calls USMCA will not be negotiated for another year. This is something that the United States would like us to do, to advance negotiations. This is something that Canada is not going to do unless we get something in return. And there's lots we can ask for in return. And we're nowhere near that date and nowhere near a decision as to whether or not this should be advanced as well.
Vandana, I do want to ask you about something Rob said a little bit earlier, which was this idea that we can't negotiate with a gun to our head when it comes to the tariffs and the trade war. Do you think that that is a realistic bar for Mark Carney? Not necessarily tomorrow, but in the medium term, to get those tariffs off. Certainly that's something that Conservatives talked about during the election campaign. Pierre Poilievre said, I would lay down the gauntlet. I would say, if I could, I would convince Mr. Trump no tariffs during a negotiation process.
I think he has to. I think, while he appreciates that's going to happen from there, he's speaking to two audiences. He's speaking to his American audience, he's talking to Donald Trump, but he's talking to Canadians too. And Canadians want to see strength. He campaigned on strength. He campaigned he can do that.
But can he get it done? I mean, it's all well and good to say this is what Donald Trump ought to do, but I wonder about the motivation of Donald Trump to listen.
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, as Rob said, we have our own resources. We have other things that we can flex as well. And I think Mark Carney knows how to use that and also use our allies as well to find other markets where we can also be like, okay, you don't want to do business with us, we can do business with other people. Rob talked about the F-35. So there's a lot of places where Canada can motivate and move the dice a little bit in favor of us.
Rachel, I'd like to ask you about that in terms of the cards that Canada has to play. I mean, we heard just before this segment started Danielle Smith talking about no export taxes without permission, something to that effect on Canadian energy. What cards does Canada have to play?
Well, I think we've touched on a couple of them, including minerals and energy and production, steel, aluminum. I mean, we are resource rich in this country. And I think that's probably one of the most stressful parts of this is that we have always been able to have that trading partner and be secure in that trade. And now it's up to the Prime Minister-elect, Mark Carney, to go down to the United States and make that case on our behalf. I mean, he doesn't have a majority, but he has close to one, and Canadians really put their trust in him to wear this negotiation. And so I think a lot of Canadians tomorrow are going to be watching what his strategy is. I would say, as somebody said, as a former political staffer, they can plan as much as they want for tomorrow and the handshake and everything that might go on in that room. But again, we have somebody who, for example, this morning just announced that he's looking to put these tariffs on the movie industry, an industry which in my province of British Columbia is $2 billion into our economy. That's maybe an offhanded comment, but at the same time has really shaken the British Columbia economy today. And so while we plan, and we plan as best as we can, at the end of the day, they have this very volatile person that they're negotiating with. But again, that's to Mark Carney to really put forward the strength that he showed in the campaign by saying that he would go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. And here it is on the table in his first few days, that test to show Canadians that they made the right choice.
Okay, Brad, one quick closing thought on this from you.
Yeah, the pain that Trump feels needs to be his supporters. The MAGA people need to feel the pain. Prices are coming up. The investments are going down. Canadians, I think, are in a good spot. One thing to keep an eye on is the timeline. So what is Trump's timeline? We've got him for 4 years, but his midterms are the next big thing. And if he can't come to some conclusions on some of this economic pain that he himself is self-inflicting, then he's going to pay a dear price at the midterms. And that's, I think, one of the horizons that Carney and the federal government need to be looking at.